Now going to introduce you to Derek McLaughlin, and Derek is the project manager in the LIFE project for the Wild Atlantic Nature. You're just sharing there. Brilliant. Thanks a million, Derek, and welcome.
Excellent, Emer. First of all, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you perfectly.
Perfect, and you got my PowerPoint on the screen.
Yeah,
great.
Everything's perfect.
Okay, can't get any better at this stage. Maybe I should stop now. Look, thanks very much. I'm delighted to be asked to speak here today, and thanks to William, Matt, and Sam as well. I know William and Sam quite well from my travels in the West here. So this presentation is about the Wild Atlantic Nature Project, of which I'm the project manager. My name is Derek McLaughlin, as you can probably see on the slide at the moment. So it sits very well with what you've seen already. It's a kind of a higher level approach here, although there are specific actions within the project itself that I'll go through in a minute. But overall, I suppose I'm presenting about the actual framework and potentially opportunities for yourselves, Galway County Council, to seek further funding and to tie in and collaborate and so on. So just a bit of a background, it's a LIFE integrated project rather than your kind of traditional LIFE project. So they tend to be long-term. This Wild Atlantic Nature is a 9-year project. It's a 20 million project. On the map on the right-hand side, you can see County Galway, and you can see that the area in the green shade is within our project area. So it's a considerable area of primarily blank bog. The key priority in the funding stream within which the funding accrues is under nature, LIFE nature, and it's the prioritized action framework of the Habitats Directive. So that's the key priority of it all. So blank bogs are what we focus on as such, but we've got responsibility for all of the prioritized action framework. So that's all of Natura 2000 and connectivity between them. So it's very, very broad scope in terms of what we cover. And of course, when we talk about climate and biodiversity and water and all of these, our Natura 2000 sites are actually supposed to be the best of the best, the holy grail where clean water comes from, where biodiversity and so on is, but obviously connectivity between sites and so on is very important too. So it's the idea of an integrated project as well is that it brings in actors, it brings in departments from various different disciplines. There are a total of 10 government departments involved in the project, and it's being coordinated by National Parks and Wildlife Service, who I work for. Another feature of these integrated projects as well is that the funding budget is 20 million, but we'd expect to attract at least another 30 million in terms of co-funding. So the idea is that it acts as a seed as well to attract other funding. So we're essentially like a practice partner. And to that end, we've an application and also another Horizon 2020 funding bid at one of our sites in the northwest of Ireland for about 2 million or so. But again, with the Common Agricultural Policy and other aspects there would form part of our additional funding for the project. These are overall project sites. They're a 250,000 hectares of primarily blanket bog, and I just overlay the high status objective water catchments on those as well. So you can see there's a really close overlap there as well. So in designing a program, there's no point in hitting one target. We've got to be looking at everything that we need to deliver, and we've got one opportunity to do that. The overall ethos of the project, okay, we can go into objectives and so on. They're fairly predictable really, but the prioritized action framework, it really comes down to one single word, if you have to boil it down to that, and that's quality. And the ethos of the project is to achieve quality, and the messages of the project are to achieve quality. It's not necessarily about let's go out and find the bad areas and try and make them better. It's rewarding the higher quality areas and incentivizing the improvement of those that are worse off. Whatever we do, we could go blocking drains, slowing the flow. We can, do all of these kind of actions that the guys have pointed out there in terms of invasives and so on. But with most of the lands within these areas, most of the lands outside of the cities in Galway are under agriculture. So what happens in the common agricultural policy is a key driver behind what happens on the ground and the fate of our services. So it's important to consider the rules and not the rules, but rather the lessons that we've learned over the past 28 years of agri-environment programs. Generally, our agricultural schemes had a one-size-fits-all, were generic, were general, had very poor monitoring built into them, or had no monitoring built into them, but were very often a way of dividing a sum of money, fixed sum of money of 300-400 million per year, across a range of farmers, and making sure that everyone had the equal amount. And it's very often, nearly always, that administrative verifiability drives these things, rather than the factors that we know are really important on the ground in terms of biodiversity. And our big problem on the ground is not the drains or the loss of habitats or overgrazing or undergrazing or whatever. It's actually our policies. It's our policies that pull against each other and create the damage that we have on the ground. So it's the messages that come from our higher policy that determine what we have on the ground. And that's the importance of the messages in this, like climate adaptation strategies and so on. They can't be overstated. And just in terms of the effectiveness, over the last 6 years, nearly 670 billion has been spent in capped funds across the EU to prevent the decline of biodiversity, and it hasn't worked. And the right-hand side there is the European Court of Auditors report that clearly states that and finds that our habitats are in very poor nick. We've only 15% of our protected habitats are in favourable conservation status. We know from Matt's talk earlier on the increase in carbon emissions and loss from our land and other sources. And we know that the associated water quality as well is very poor, or is relatively poor. Certainly the areas that we'd expect high status we have a tenfold decline in those pristine water qualities over the past 30 years or thereabouts. So our policies are too narrowly focused. We go to try and solve funding by clearing out the wet woodland or whatever that might be. So that's something that's hugely important. And here I have just a list of ingredients that we know are factors that work and are demonstrated over the past 2, 5, 10, 15 years. And they not only apply to agri-environment programs, but they apply to any program. And there's a list of them here: locally adapted, practical and results focused, developed with local people, be they farmers, landowners, and communities. Being properly funded, flexible and adaptive management is hugely important, because we all do things differently. We have different ways of doing things. People have understanding of the way their land works, which can be quite different to people from in other areas, local variations and so on. Building local trust and capacity and facilitating improvement is hugely important. If everybody's getting exactly the same money from CAP or whatever it may be, why would you bother? You'd be almost a fool to go improving the quality on the ground. So higher payments for better quality results is something that's hugely important. And the likes of the Promisal Project EIP, which is a recent enough EIP on which I previously worked, the Hen Harrier Project EIP and the Burren Programme are fantastic examples of these in action. And just in terms of one of the key aspects here is this results focused and these results based schemes. The idea here is really quite simple. There's a big purple balloon, or it's whatever color that is, with results payments in it. And essentially the way they work is that farmers' payments relate to results on the ground. The higher the quality, the higher the payment. What do I need to do for that? You don't need to do anything. The payment relates to that. If you've got fantastic habitats, if they're functioning really well, if the water that comes off those is very clean, etc., there's a very good payment. If it's not working, there's a very low payment or no payment whatsoever. But there's that facility to improve. The actions that Sam talked about there and William, these are how we describe as supporting actions, actions that are there to maybe slow the flow through drain blocking, to restore peatlands, to remove invasive species or whatever it may be. are we call supporting actions, and they're almost like a little tablet that one would take to make yourself better. You hopefully don't get addicted to them, but it's something that improves your results-based payment. So the higher the quality, the higher the payment. And it's all underpinned by a very straightforward scorecard, a habitat scorecard. And this is one example from the Prime Mussel project. And in fact, I know William works with William and the guys in Connemara National Park are part of that as well. And they score their lands and so on using this. But it's a very straightforward score out of 10 that relates to the quality of the land. It highlights issues with rhododendron or whatever the other issues might be, but the message is extremely clear to the farmer. And it is that idea of aligning these different policies here as well. So how it looks on the ground, a given farm with a whole range of scores from 0 to 10, depending on the quality. And you can clearly see there's a few issues with drains going in. Your supporting actions are designed to, it may be slowing the flow, it may be putting buffer zones in, it may be assistance in reducing stocking densities or advice relating to reducing stocking densities, or managing your lands differently, introducing some cattle, creating a diversity, because it's often not just the intensity, but rather the specialization of stock that cause these issues. Lack of cattle in some areas may give rise to problems because it's only sheep that are grazing. So that relates. Different places are different, but that's a key important aspect to that. So like when a farmer is involved in this, what they look at, they see their scorecard and they say, okay, well, look, I'm losing a lot of points, or I may be getting no payments whatsoever on this peatland. And why? Oh, well, because there's active drains in it, there's turbary on it, there's et cetera, et cetera. I am getting points because there's a lot of species there, but I may not be getting a sufficient number of points to receive a payment. Like, we don't pay for anything less than a 4 out of 10, for example. But the first question a farmer will say, well, what can I do? Well, there's a list of stuff that you can do, but that's up to yourself. If you want to do that and invest in your farm, the ecosystems of your farm, we'll assist you to do that. And these are some examples of different drain blocking, different issues that may be solved. The first thing the farmer does is, well, there's the issue. This is what I can do to solve it, and away they go, rather than the current model. So it creates that new model for farmers for biodiversity, carbon, and water. And of course, working on a landscape scale is hugely important. And there's some excellent examples from the Hen Harrier project looking at a fire resilience aspect on this landscape level. So another feature of Wild Atlantic Nature is we're developing this landscape level scorecard that will take into account the broader quality of that and the broader function of that as well. It ties in very well with, and we've had several meetings with yourselves in Natural Capital Ireland and Catherine Farrell or Catherine Wilkie as well, and Orla there. So it's a really nice tie-in in terms of what's happening on the ground. So the bottom line here is that we all know the ecosystem services. You could list them to the cows come home of proper functioning habitats, but on the right-hand side, quality becomes the platform here. Within the project, we have, so similar to a traditional life project, we have certain actions that we will be carrying out. The results-based program is one of them, but there's marketing, there's restoration of bog and all of these kind of actions there. But the key aspect to this is quality. So it's the basis for natural marketing, or tourism, or land use planning, for food labeling, and for farmer payments and others. So if we all focused on the quality and that came into the consideration of our land use planning, I think it would change things a lot on the ground, the overall function of these sub-basin catchments. So here, it's essentially just looking for coherence. That's the hugely important aspect. I'm just going to skip through these. We've got 2 left, and I don't want to overshoot the time. So if I was only showing you one slide, this would capture the overall picture here as well, starting with the center, the building capacity. This results-based program that I'm talking about, this landscape approach, it very much is about building capacity in terms of farmers and advisors and communities through knowledge sharing programs, and through your surveys, through what Matt was talking about earlier on, because we have already, covariance towers and so on order. We're working with the likes of Shane Regan and Mark O'Connor in that as well, and hopefully we'll get to collaborate with Matt as well as time moves on. So that ties in very much with our education awareness or dissemination of manuals through schools and so on. And then very much on the left-hand side then is our actual management, our intervention. We're required, we're driven by the landowners and where it's the right thing to do, and through understanding of the landowners, and ideally by the landowners themselves that understand it with proper training, will put in their, whatever interventions are appropriate in those areas, be they fencing or removing fencing, or perhaps drain blocking or reactivating peatlands or whatever. So then, just to conclude, I suppose in just overall take-home messages, the really massive aspect of importance is this integrated land use framework. It's something we've been working a lot about with in terms of the CAP. Integrated departmental approaches are very important. I know William's very good there at communications with other government departments, and that's so important. The focus on quality is a hugely important thing, because of the messages become positive, and people are much more willing when it becomes about focus on quality rather than focusing on the negatives and introducing penalties and so on. So the investment in landowner skill is something that's overestimated or underestimated as well. And that's, we think about drain blocking and we think about specific actions rather than those that are responsible for managing the land and their knowledge and their skills of the land management. I'd say that this, being an integrated life project, is a huge opportunity for, I would say, local authorities, for community groups to collaborate, to act as a practice partner, because we have our overall budget, but our remit is also to attract co-funding as well, and to attract collaborative funding. So we can apply for other traditional life projects, we can apply for EIP funding, whatever the funding model, perhaps even through LEADER, where particular issues are there to be solved. And I think that's really good. So I'd, as a take-home message, I think this is a very good opportunity to collaborate. And thanks very much for listening.